They do point to the diversity now of the workforce, to improved morale, to improved strategies on how to come up with solutions to their increased profitability.
None of that research is credible. There's no evidence whatsoever that diversity as measured by racial or gender representation has any bearing whatsoever on creativity, productivity, outcome, any of the things you're measuring. Men and women make different amounts of money. More agreeable people get paid less. Why? They're not as assertive.
Another facet of Jordan Peterson that Koreans probably saw less of is the discussions of identity and equality. The actual data for equality in Korea is pretty minimal, but if you look at the OECD ratings, where Korea ranks quite low for gender equality, Korea seems like some kind of hell for women. This rating is based on education, wages, and workforce participation, political representation. Strange though that Korean women are the most educated people in the world, according to the OECD. Most teachers are women, and Korean teachers rank in the top 10 around the world for teacher salaries. Now, the wage gap in the West, anyway, has been pretty discredited for the past 20 years, unless you're a journalist, of course.
From a social science perspective, the idea of the gender pay gap is it's so poorly formulated that it's almost staggering to me that people can even conceptualize it in this manner. And we can't assume that just because in all situations women don't make as much money as men, although there are some situations in which the reverse is true, by the way, that the reason for that is prejudice and oppression. That already men are much more likely to do dangerous jobs. They're also more likely to do jobs that scale. Men are more likely to move than women are. Men are more likely to take on trade positions. They're more likely to work with heavy machinery. They're more likely to work outside.
There are a myriad of ways in which the overall difference in pay between all men and all women can be explained, and it's rarely due to prejudice. In fact, someone had tried to prove me wrong on this by showing that a woman was suing her company for paying her less for the same job than another worker. Like, yeah, that's exactly what's supposed to happen. It's against the law. I asked her to come back to me if the lawsuit was lost, despite proving discrimination, but I never heard from her again. As for Korea, though, I found a study done by Koreans that falls into the same traps as the Western studies, trying to prove a wage gap. Now, it doesn't look at specific job positions, but overall earnings. The only time they look at specific job positions is to show if they are male or female dominated. Now, the funny thing about this study is it says working hours have a statistically significant positive effect on the gender wage gap in male-dominated occupations, but not in female-dominated ones. A primary factor in explaining the large gender wage gap in Korea. And then, a bit after that, it casually mentions, oh, by the way, many women in Korea are irregular workers or part-time jobs. And another section reads, although the working hours of both men and women have decreased, the working hours of women have decreased much more noticeably than those of men. Analyzing the reason for that is beyond the scope of this paper. That is exactly the point of this paper. Well, that partly explains the overall wage gap, but why do women struggle to compete in male-dominated fields?
The law firms cannot keep their women in their 30s. They all leave. Why? Because the women hit 30, they're brilliant, conscientious, intelligent, they were deadly in high school, deadly in university, they nailed law school, they whipped through their articling, they made partner by the time they were 30. It was like they're in a rocket to the top position. What do they find when they get there? 80-hour work weeks, right? Because that's one of the things you want to think about. You know, you think that the people who run things are sitting at home smoking big cigars and like telling their minions what to do. I know lots of people like that, and they work all the time. And they don't just casually work, you know, because I know some of you go to the library for 6 hours and you say, well, I studied in the library for 6 hours. Like, no, you didn't. You studied for half an hour. The issue isn't why aren't there more women in positions of power? It's why are there any men insane enough ever to occupy those positions?
So this is why men represent more self-employed businesses with or without employees around the world. It's not indicative of discrimination, but of lifestyle choice. I should make clear that this does not mean women should be paid less for the same job, that women should not be in positions of power, or that women are never discriminated against. What it does mean is that women tend to earn less in the aggregate because they are not as competitive in general and de facto occupy less positions of power. Hong Kong women also earn less overall because they leave the workforce early, and when that's taken into account, the pay gap there basically disappears. It's not a matter of culture, therefore. So the OECD can point to low numbers in women in government. Is the solution to force women to be interested in politics and force them to run for office? So this is the difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome.
The problem I have with identity politics as a mode of philosophical apprehension is that it's predicated on the idea that the appropriate way to classify people is by their group identity. If you're a proponent, for example, of equality of outcome, of quotas, then you de facto accept the proposition that it's the group identity that is primary, and there's all sorts of dangers that are associated with that far outweigh whatever good you're likely to do.
So if we're going to want 50% women and 50% men, say, in Congress, why not include all other possible identities? Why not lesbian women? How about lesbian women from Southeast Asia? What about blind lesbian women from Southeast Asia? Or blind, overweight lesbian women from Southeast Asia? Now, if this ridiculous person manages to earn the job, that's great. If not, it doesn't matter if she represents anyone because she won't do a good job. That's the fallacy of representation. If you've read Peterson's earlier book, Maps of Meaning, the dangers of this practice become clear. So when equality of outcome is the goal, people are forced into jobs they don't want, which means the jobs are not being done well, which hurts the economy. And suddenly everyone's poor. Well, that technically is a kind of equality when everyone's starving, eh? The curious thing is why there's only clamoring for equality in politics or for CEOs or things like that, but not in mining or nuclear power plants or anything. Sounds like an arbitrary power grab. You might argue that denying such a power grab is a means of maintaining men in power, but rather it's a way of denying less qualified people.
If I'm understanding what you're saying, the picture you paint is a bleak one.
No, I don't think it's particularly bleak. You know, it looks like real salaries are on the rise and general levels of poverty around the world are declining incredibly rapidly. Women are being educated at an unbelievably high rate compared to 30 years ago. Like, there's all sorts of reasons to be optimistic. But equity is not one of them. It's a bad idea, and we're going to pay for toying with it.
The lack of appreciation for all these things he mentioned is actually one of the worst parts, because the Korean study I mentioned earlier was complaining that long work hours favors males significantly since they don't do housework. I mean, obviously, Korean males are pretty shitty about that, but disregarding the fact that women have a choice to enter the workforce or to start a family, while the entire history of mankind saw men doing these long work hours without a second option, and that's why men die earlier. But, you know, Emma Watson and those people can keep lying to themselves because they think society is sending them messages that because they're 30, they should have a kid. No. If anything, modern society is encouraging you to forget about that shit and focus on work. It's probably your ovaries sending you these messages like, we don't have much time. We are low on ammo. If anyone complains that this video was a bunch of mansplaining, you should know that 10 minutes ago, I identified as a bitch.